You think you know silence, but you've never heard the kind that wraps around a forbidden corridor where every step echoes like a secret. You've never stood in a manor hallway at midnight, holding your breath because the wrong whisper could rewrite your fate. Tonight, that's exactly where you'll find yourself. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? Is it already midnight, or are you sneaking this story in just before sleep? Whether you're curled up in bed or letting the day melt away with your headphones in, you're welcome here. This is your quiet moment, your secret window into a past they never told you about. And if you enjoy being led through history's shadows, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more hidden hallways waiting for us. Let the world around you slow down. Let the flicker of candlelight guide your imagination. Because what comes next is not just a story, it's an experience. One woven with fear, power, and the lives they erased. In medieval high society, the marriage bed was never just a piece of furniture. It was sacred ground and a political stage. Unlike our modern private sanctuaries, the noble marriage bed was wrapped in layers of symbolism, obligation, and surveillance. The bed marked the consummation of an alliance far more significant than the union of two bodies. It was the joining of families, fortunes, and futures. The ritual of consummation wasn't a whispered moment behind closed doors. It could be a public, even theatrical event, crucial to affirming the legitimacy of a marriage. Nobles lived under intense scrutiny. The production of heirs, especially sons, was a matter of dynastic survival and political stability. Without a confirmed consummation, a marriage could be annulled, jeopardizing alliances and inheritance. Medieval society's obsession with proving the bride's virginity and the couple's consummation gave the bed a unique dual role. It was at once a private site of intimacy and a public tool of power. The ceremony surrounding the first night's act involved witnesses, birthing rooms prepared for inspection, and sometimes the ritual display of the marriage sheets stained with blood as proof. These acts made the bedroom less a sanctuary than a courtroom. The marriage bed was so sacrosanct that entire legal frameworks grew around it. Canon law, reinforced by cultural norms, mandated consummation as essential. Lack of it could lead to annulment, but feigning consummation, fabricating evidence, or strategic concealment also played into the politics of power. The bed was a negotiation space, a battlefield of desire, duty, and deception. Wooden canopies, embroidered hangings, and the very positioning of the bed conveyed more than comfort or warmth. Colors, fabrics, and ornaments were chosen to reflect status and power. Red, the color of blood, passion, and fertility, often dominated bed curtains. This spectacle told a story to observers, guests, and future heirs. This is a union sealed with intention and witnessed by both society and God. Nobles invested heavily in the bed's symbolism. Some beds were designed to impress with scale and craftsmanship. Rich tapestries depicted scenes of mythic loves, chivalric quests, or biblical tales of purity and marriage. This visual language set the tone, an environment where physical union was bound tightly to reputations and legacies. The interplay of religion, law, and social custom tied the marriage bed to broader themes of power and control. Clergy were often the arbiters of marriage's legitimacy, conducting blessings and sometimes overseeing consummation indirectly. Yet, nobles manipulated these structures to serve their agendas, occasionally involving midwives or trusted servants as corroborators or witnesses. Understanding these complex rituals challenges modern assumptions that medieval intimacy was purely private or romantic. Instead, it was performative and political, with the physical act of consummation doubling as a visible affirmation of alliances, territorial claims, and the continuation of noble bloodlines. To grasp the marriage bed's full importance, we must unpack its various roles from the public bedding, ceremonies, and virginity, proofs to the negotiation of desire and power between spouses. This first part sets the stage for exploring the marriage bed as a crucible of medieval high society's intimate and political lives. The consummation of noble marriages wasn't merely a private moment of union. It often unfolded as a staged, public spectacle. These bedding ceremonies transformed the intimate act into a political event, reinforcing power structures and signaling alliances to a wider audience beyond the couple. The first night's bedding was, in many cases, witnessed either directly or indirectly by family, servants, or appointed proxies tasked with confirming that the marriage was complete. This practice might seem invasive or brutal by modern standards, but in medieval high society, it was a necessary ritual. Legitimacy hinged on proof. The political stakes were high: inheritance rights, territorial claims, and the continuation of bloodlines all depended on undeniable evidence that the bride was consummated. A marriage unconsummated lacked the binding force needed to uphold social contracts. Sometimes annulments followed, abruptly altering the landscape of alliances and power at some noble courts. The ritual was expliciter: procession escorting the young couple to the bedchamber, accompanied by trusted witnesses, often elder women or These observers ensured that the couple retired properly, that the bridal chamber was properly prepared, and, in some cases, remained nearby to attest to the consummation. The bedding might be announced with fanfare or held more discreetly, but never private in the modern sense. The display of the marriage sheets after the night was another performative element. The blood-stained linens served as the ultimate physical proof of the bride's virginity and the marriage's consummation, object lesson in honor and legitimacy. These sheets might be shown at public gatherings or inspected by relatives and officials. A clean sheet, conversely, could cast doubt and foment suspicion, endangering reputations and provoking scandals that could fracture families and alliances. This ritual display fused biology, symbolism, and social control. Blood on the bedsheets wasn't merely proof of sex, it was a signifier of female virtue, male virility, and divine sanction. The color red, deeply potent in medieval symbolism, represented fertility and Christian salvation, linking the physical act with spiritual and dynastic continuation. Failure to produce this sign was a political crisis as much as a private disgrace. But the public bedding also invited manipulation and performance. Brides, fearing disgrace or rejection, sometimes resorted to cunning strategies. Historical records hint that servants might pool animal blood to stain sheets, or the bride might prick a finger in secret. The stakes made deception a survival tool. These fabrications, whether successful or uncovered, further complicated the ritual's reliability and underscored the tension between public spectacle and private reality. Canon, law-framed consummation, as a sacred duty and legal requisite, embedding this public performance within ecclesiastical authority. Bishops and church officials often blessed the marital bed and underscored the spiritual significance of the act. The intertwining of church law and noble custom ensured that marriage beds served as instruments of control, policing female sexuality and reinforcing patriarchal structures. However, the political power of the marriage bed extended beyond the first night. The ongoing ability of the couple to produce heirs, especially male, was perpetually scrutinized. Wombs were monitored, and in some cases, families employed midwives or medical experts not only for health but to guarantee fertility and continued dynastic success. The bed was thus a site of ongoing expectation, pressure, and sometimes surveillance. The couple's relationship itself was shaped by these pressures, while modern ideas of marital intimacy include privacy and mutual consent. Medieval noble marriages were shaped foremost by duty and alliance. Desire and pleasure might be secondary, or even deferred to the priorities of lineage, property, and power consolidation. The marriage bed was the crucible where these often conflicting demands collided, yet the bed also became a site of pleasure and power within its constraints. Nobles understood the bed's dual role, a political tool and a place for sensuality and bonding. Erotic tapestries, luxurious fabrics, and fine linens served not only to impress, but to create an environment conducive to desire. Some writings and artwork from the period reveal an awareness of sexuality's role in marriage beyond procreation. Love poems, courtly literature, and private correspondence hint that pleasure, though circumscribed, was valued within the elite. Marital context. Rooms dedicated to the marriage bed were often the most richly appointed. Sumptuous velvet hangings, embroidered pillows, and carefully chosen colors and materials created a staged intimacy meant to affirm status and facilitate the conjugal encounter. These details told a story. This union was precious, observed, and invested with meaning beyond the physical. Even the placement of the bed within the chamber carried significance. In many noble households, the marriage bed was placed beneath windows facing the rising sun or a chapel, symbolizing new beginnings and divine favor. The orientation could reflect the family's religious devotion or dynastic ambitions. This spatial symbolism added another layer to the bed's power as a site of consummation. The politics of the noble marriage bed also intersected with gender roles and expectations. Women, prized for their virginity and reproductive potential, bore tremendous pressure. Men, expected to demonstrate virility, had duties to perform with public and private consequences. The success or failure in the marriage bed could affect reputations, claims to power, and even survival. Male impotence or reluctance could lead to annulment. Female infertility might be blamed on the woman, often unfairly. Moreover, the marriage bed served as a tool for social discipline. The ritual reinforcement of patriarchal control through public consumption and verification of consummation maintained social hierarchies. It regulated female bodies and sexuality, enforcing chastity until marriage and obedience thereafter. The bed was both a symbol and mechanism of power relations within noble families. This surveillance extended into the ceremonial aspects of marriage itself. Witnesses to marriage rituals were often chosen for their loyalty and status, ensuring that every stage from betrothal to bedding reinforced alliances and social order. The marriage bed was a focal point for this network of watchful eyes, merging private life with public stakes. At times, the bed became the battleground for disputes. Noble families contested inheritance rights based on whether a marriage was consummated. Legal battles could revolve around the authenticity of the bedding ceremony or the presence of blood on sheets. This illustrates how deeply the physical connotations of the marriage bed threaded into the political and legal fabric of the time. Interestingly, some historical accounts suggest that bedding ceremonies might have been formalized as preventative measures against infidelity claims. By documenting the consummation publicly, families aimed to preempt allegations of sham marriages or illegitimate heirs. The bed's role in controlling lineage and property rights was thus even more vital, while the theology of the era emphasized procreation. There was also an acknowledgement of the psychological and emotional components of marriage linked to the bed. Some writers speculated about the marital relationship evolving from obligation to affection, facilitated by shared nights in the marriage bed. Literary sources occasionally celebrated the pleasures of physical intimacy, though always within the bounds of duty. The nature of consummation was further complicated by the involvement of midwives and other attendants, who might be called upon to assist or observe. In some cases, a midwife's testimony could prove crucial in legal cases concerning consummation, underscoring the intersection of medical, social, and political spheres within the marriage bed's context. Yet beneath this intricate web of spectacle, law, and power, the marriage bed remained a deeply personal space of transformation for many couples. Despite external pressures, the conjugal act could foster genuine intimacy and alliance, shaping the couple's future both politically and personally. The dual nature of the noble marriage bed, as both a stage for public power dynamics and a locus for private pleasure and alliance, defines its unique place in medieval life. It embodied the complex interplay between societal expectations and personal relationships, making it a critical yet paradoxical symbol of medieval nobility. As we move forward, this exploration will delve deeper into how nobles prepared for the marriage bed, the ceremonial rites surrounding it, and the ways in which this sacred space was both constructed and contested across European high society. The marriage bed itself was far more than a functional object. It was a meticulously constructed symbol of wealth, status, and political intention. Nobles spared no expense in outfitting this space. Every element was carefully chosen to reflect their power and secure the legacy their union was meant to produce. The canopy, the curtains, the bedding, and even the placement within the chamber were strategic decisions steeped in meaning. First, the choice of fabrics was critical. Rich damasks, velvet, and silk, embroidered with gold and silver threads, were standard fare for noble marriage beds. These materials not only demonstrated wealth, but also referenced purity and fertility. White linens, symbolic of the bride's virginity, were layered with bold-colored hangings, especially reds or purples, colors that evoked passion, blood, and royal authority. The bed's curtains offered both privacy and spectacle. When drawn, they transformed the bed into a sanctified altar. When pulled back, they allowed witnesses a glimpse into the couple's consummation and the sealing of that alliance. The construction of the bed frame, often of oak, elm, or walnut, was a craft in itself. Carvings adorning the bed might depict heraldic shields, mythical creatures, or religious iconography, all reinforcing the social and spiritual order of the family. Some beds featured intricate reliefs of Adam and Eve, emphasizing the biblical sanction of marriage and procreation. Others included motifs referencing fertility gods or emblematic symbols such as pomegranates, vervain, or roses, which subtly celebrated life, regeneration, and desire. Location within the chamber was equally significant. Marriage beds were frequently positioned to receive the morning light, symbolizing new beginnings, the dawn of family lineage, and divine favor upon the union. Sometimes the placement was chosen to align with household chapels or shrines, physically connecting the conjugal act with religious devotion. Such spatial symbolism broadcasted the union's sacredness and projected power to visiting guests and the wider community. preparation of the bed extended beyond the physical. The chamber was often perfumed with herbs considered auspicious or protective, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for purity, and basil to ward off evil spirits. These scents created a multisensory environment where sensuality and spirituality coexisted. Holy water might be sprinkled on the sheets by a priest or a trusted family elder to bless the union and shield the couple from misfortune. This act blurred the boundary between sacred ritual and intimate ceremony, reinforcing that the marriage bed was both a political and spiritual site. Prior to the couple's arrival, elaborate rituals ensured the space was immaculate and charged with positive energy. In some noble households, a group of women, often including older relatives, servants, and sometimes midwives, participated. In preparation, these women might weave incantations or prayers into the room, spread flower petals on the floor, or hang protective charms nearby. Their presence signaled collective investment in the couple's success and the household's future security. One intriguing tradition was the use of specially prepared sheets. These might be embroidered with symbols of fertility or union, or woven with secret patterns known only to the family. The linens themselves became heirlooms, folded away and guarded as treasures, symbolizing both past and future unions. When displayed after the wedding night, these sheets served as public proof and discreet boast of the marriage's consummation and legitimacy. But not all preparations were merely auspicious or ceremonial. Some also functioned as social control. The bedchamber was policed by relatives or retainers to ensure the bride's virginity was preserved until that first night, and that the couple behaved according to social and moral expectations. The marriage bed was not just the place of desire, but a stage where roles were enforced and reputations made or broken. Failure to meet expectations brought swift consequences, from family disgrace to legal challenges. Within the marriage chamber, the bride's arrival was a moment of both spectacle and anxiety. Her procession might be accompanied by courtiers, music, and proclamations, a public affirmation of the alliance's importance. The quality of her dress, her comportment, and her interaction with the groom was scrutinized as much as the bed decorations. The atmosphere combined anticipation, pressure, and performance, reflecting the high stakes at play. Interestingly, there were also attempts to manage privacy within this highly publicized event. While bedding ceremonies might have witnesses, the act itself often remained veiled by curtains or discreetly shielded moments. Nobles understood that intimacy was a balancing act between visibility for legitimacy and respect for propriety. The tension between these impulses shaped the marriage rituals and ultimately the experience of the bed. The newlyweds' experience within the marriage bed was heavily shaped by these symbolic structures and social expectations. For most noble couples, consummation was less about personal affection and more about fulfilling roles and duties critical to family survival. Yet, there are glimpses in letters, poetry, and art that suggest moments of genuine connection and pleasure were possible, and even celebrated, though carefully framed within acceptable bounds. This complex interplay between ritual and reality made the marriage bed a powerful nexus of medieval noble life. Fabric, wood, scent, and ritual combined to create a space where sexuality served the twin purposes of personal alliance and dynastic politics. The marriage bed was at once a sanctuary, a stage, and a symbol, a place where the private and public inseparably intertwined. With the marriage bed set and the couple ready, what unfolded next was a performance dense with power, duty, and desire. In the coming sections, we will explore the roles played by witnesses, midwives, and clergy during consummation, the social and legal implications of the marriage bed's rituals, and how noble spouses navigated this mix of intimacy and spectacle in the medieval noble household. The marriage bed was far from a private bedroom affair. It was a stage for power, proof, and performance, guarded vigilantly by trusted witnesses and skilled midwives whose roles extended beyond mere assistance to active confirmation of legitimacy. The presence of these figures during and after the consummation ceremony underscores how intimately social control and bodily intimacy were intertwined in medieval society. Witnesses to the bedding ceremony were often close relatives, usually elderly women, female servants loyal to the family, or male chamberlains acting as impartial eyes. Their task was to ensure the bride's virginity and the couple's consummation, critical markers of a binding marriage contract. This was not voyeurism born from prurient curiosity, but a function of dynastic security, ensuring heirs would be uncontested, and political alliances sustained. Midwives played a crucial role beyond their expected duties of assisting childbirth. They were often called upon on the wedding night to oversee the physical proof that consummation had taken place. They were trained to handle delicate inspections, looking for signs of consummation, such as the bride's bleeding from hymenal rupture or other physical marks. Midwives literally became corporeal guarantors of a marriage's validity, balancing medical knowledge, social expectation, and legal weight. This dynamic illustrates how female bodies became battlegrounds of honor and power. Midwives wielded a unique form of authority. They could confirm or question a woman's virtue and the bride's capacity to fulfill her marital duties. Sometimes they testified in courts where annulments hinged on proof of consummation or virginity. Their word could make or break social standing. The presence of witnesses also mitigated accusations of sexual misconduct. An unconsummated marriage could be annulled. A consummated one was irrevocable by ecclesiastical and secular law alike. Public or semi-public verification upheld the marriage's binding force and prevented disputes that could fragment noble lineages and estates. The marriage bed's sanctity was inseparable from its political function. Yet, this surveillance came with complexity and tension. What happened behind the curtained bed was performed with an ambivalence rarely acknowledged. Couples faced pressure to produce the evidence demanded by families and church authority, while struggling with the realities of intimacy under such scrutiny. The expectation of immediate consummation could be daunting, given the bride's youth and the political nature of the match. The inspection of bridal sheets was one of the strictest public affirmations of consummation. The tradition of displaying the blood-stained linens symbolized a woman's virginity and the successful undressing of the marriage contract's conditions. This ritual, conducted often before witnesses, could be profoundly humiliating yet crucial for establishing family honor. If the sheets bore no evidence of blood, scandals frequently followed. The bride's reputation could be irrevocably damaged, her family's standing jeopardized. Annulments, financial penalties, and even violence could ensue. The political stakes made the sheet inspection a high-risk ritual with life consequences. Brides and their families understood this well. The pressure-induced strategies of deception. Brides could secretly prick their fingers or arrange for staged evidence, sometimes abetted by servants or midwives sympathetic to their plight. These fabrications expose a tension between societal demands and individual survival, where truth was negotiable in the face of rigid expectations. men felt intense pressure, too, albeit in different ways. Proving virility was essential not only on the wedding night but throughout the marriage. Impotence was grounds for annulment and public shame, threatening the man's honor and political alliances. Some men sought training ahead of marriage and sometimes engaged prostitutes as tutors. As reflected in medical treatises and popular advice, the marriage bed's legal and social significance was reinforced continuously. Families monitored the couple's fertility, often employing midwives and physicians to diagnose barrenness or illness. Fertility was not a private matter, but a dynastic imperative. Failure to produce heirs could lead to annulments, remarriage, or complicated succession disputes. This focus on fertility intertwined with medical and religious interventions. Holy water, prayers, charms, and herbal remedies accompanied physical efforts to ensure childbirth. The bed was both a site of human desire and divine crucible where medieval understandings of body, spirit, and power converged. Gendered expectations around the marriage bed were thus sharpened by legal, medical, and religious oversight. Women bore the burden of sexual purity, fertility, and submission, their bodies surveilled, medically examined, and socialized to perform strict roles. Men commanded authority but remained vulnerable to accusations undermining their honor and ability to secure heirs. The marriage bed's rituals reveal how medieval society conflated bodies with property, sexuality with sovereignty. Nobles negotiated love, power, and legitimacy in the most intimate spaces, where trust was bounded by obligation and visibility. Privacy was sacrificed to politics, and pleasure was frequently subordinated to duty. Yet, within these constraints, glimpses of negotiation and resistance emerge. Some couples found genuine affection or mutual understanding, buffering the pressures of alliance and performance. Others used cleverness to navigate or subvert sexual politics, discreet defense of virginity, delayed consummation for strategic reasons, or subtle assertions of agency within prescribed roles. This interplay between control and agency around the marriage bed continues to captivate historians. It challenges modern views on medieval intimacy, showing a complex world where power permeated the private domain and where the bed was a locus of social order as much as personal experience. The marriage bed was far from merely a place for union. It became a contested arena where gender roles, power dynamics, and social expectations played out in often brutal fashion. Noble marriages, especially in the medieval period, were political arrangements cloaked in ritual and constrained by obligation. Behind the canopy, spouses navigated a landscape of pressure where desire mingled uneasily with duty, and relationships were shaped as much by social scripts as by personal affection. For noble women, the bed's significance was layered with contradictions. They were prized primarily for their virginity and fertility, symbolic vessels entrusted to produce legitimate heirs, but this expectation came draped in control and surveillance. A woman's value was bound to her ability to perform sexually, on command, bear children, and maintain her reputation as chaste before marriage and obedient after. Failure in the marriage bed could have devastating consequences, both socially and legally. Hymenal rupture. Public proof of virginity was expected at consummation, yet this was biologically variable. Some brides did not bleed, others suffered injury. The social implications could be severe. A clean sheet might trigger suspicions of deceit, lead to accusations of premarital sex, or even annulment. Women learned early that the marriage bed was less about mutual exploration and more a test scrutinized by witnesses, family, and law. Men also faced pressures, though framed through different expectations, proving virility, often on the very first night, was a matter of honor and political security. Impotence or disinterest threatened alliance stability and could void contracts. Men were often coached, sometimes crudely before marriage, sometimes by prostitutes, to ensure performance. Yet failure was shaming, sometimes devastating enough to force men into monastic life or exile to preserve familial dignity. This asymmetry produced tension and negotiation. Noble women occasionally resisted or delayed consummation, buying time to understand their new circumstances or protect themselves. Historical accounts suggest brides' families might intervene. If a groom was violent or the match undesirable, sometimes consummation was a bargaining chip delayed until demands were met, dowries paid, or alliances firmed. This subtle negotiation exposed the power the bride and her kin could exert within a system otherwise dominated by male authority. The marriage bed was also a site of embodied learning and adaptation. Noble couples often married young and inexperienced to explore intimacy within strict social confines. Instructions on sexual conduct circulated in manuscripts, advice given in hushed tones by midwives or older women. These guides offered remedies for nervous brides, techniques for arousing reluctant husbands, and cautions about sinful pleasure. They reveal a medieval culture deeply invested in controlling bodies, but also aware of human desires. Eroticism in the noble marriage bed was paradoxical. On one hand, the Church preached sex as sinful unless solely for procreation. On the other, courtly culture celebrated desire, attraction, and flirtation. Erotic literature illuminated manuscripts, and art suggests nobility recognized sex's pleasures while trying to tame them. Beds were decorated not only for status, but to cultivate an atmosphere of sensuality-rich fabrics, embroidered motifs, and the ritual use of perfumes and incense. The tension between restraint and desire, control and pleasure, gave the marriage bed a dual identity. It was both a site of reproductive duty and personal intimacy. Some historians argue that over time, the wedding night and subsequent relations could foster affection, partnership, and even love, despite their engineered beginnings. Letters between noble couples occasionally express fondness, longing, and regret, complicating assumptions of purely transactional unions. Yet power imbalances persisted. Noble women had limited sexual agency and faced harsh judgment for transgressions. Their bodies were policed by families, church, and community. Accusations of infertility, infidelity, or sexual misbehavior could ruin reputations or strip women of status and property. The marriage bed was a nexus where the politics of control, surveillance, and punishment were enacted as harshly as in courts or councils. Men's roles carried pressures, but also privileges. Male sexual experience outside marriage was often tolerated or encouraged as a training, while women's premarital virginity was fiercely guarded. Mistresses and concubines were accepted in noble circles as long as the principal marriage produced heirs and maintained social appearances. Thus, the marriage bed represented both the idealized partnership and a complex terrain of competing loyalties, desires, and power plays. Despite these constraints, medieval women sometimes exercised covert power through sexual knowledge. Midwives, attendants, and noblewomen exchanged wisdom on managing the marital bed, how to stimulate, how to delay, how to protect or manipulate outcomes. The intersection of medical knowledge and social practice granted women a discrete expertise, giving them influence in a domain ostensibly controlled by men and church law. The political function of the marriage bed also extended into broader inheritance and succession disputes. Laws and customs concerning consummation and legitimacy shaped noble fortunes. A failed or contested bedding could annul alliances, trigger legal battles, or fragment estates. Noble families keenly monitored the outcomes of marriages, not just for children, but for the guarantees marriage offered. The bed was a locus where personal lives converged with dynastic survival in some cases. Marriages remained unconsummated by choice or circumstance, leading to disputes, dissolutions, or second marriages. The pressure to produce heirs created cycles of arranged remarriage, often at great personal cost to involved women. These practices reveal how the marriage bed was a site of ongoing negotiation and conflict, far from static or monolithic. The symbolism of the marriage bed endured beyond the bedroom. It was invoked in legal contracts, wills, and public ceremonies. The bed's presence in tapestries, paintings, and literature reinforced its cultural significance. In rituals like the bedding ceremony, the bed was literally paraded as a testament to union and power, underscoring that it was as much a social totem as furniture. This dual role of the marriage bed's sacred site and political instrument reflects medieval society's intricate blending of public and private, body and polity, sexuality and sovereignty. Nobles understood that marriage beds could serve as stages where alliances were sealed, disputes resolved, and histories written. The blood and linens were more than physical traces. They were tokens of social order and legitimacy. The marriage bed thus remained an enduring symbol of medieval power dynamics, where desire and duty entwined with family ambitions, social control, and personal survival. It encapsulated the tensions of medieval noble life between freedom and constraint, secrecy and spectacle, pleasure and repression. Behind the richly embroidered curtains, the political and emotional dramas of medieval nobility played out in full complexity. The marriage bed was not just a symbol of noble union, but also a battleground for religious authority and moral regulation. The Church exerted immense influence over matrimonial rites, shaping how consummation was conducted, interpreted, and judged. Clergy were both spiritual guides and enforcers of social order, ensuring that marriage aligned with Christian doctrine and served broader ecclesiastical goals. Before the newlyweds even approached the bed, the Church's hand was evident. Marriage was ideally solemnized with a priest's blessing, witnessed by an approved congregation, and recorded lest disputes arise. Canon law codified the necessity of consummation, not just as a private act, but as the sacramental confirmation of union. Without it, marriages risked annulment, which disrupted political alliances and could ripple through noble lineages. The Church's obsession with virginity and purity shaped the rituals surrounding medieval bedding ceremonies. It wasn't enough for the bride to be married. Formally, she had to enter the bed undefiled, lest her honor and family legacy be questioned. This created a paradox, as the Church preached chastity before marriage but sanctioned the passionate, often public ritual of consummation as a sacramental act. In many noble households, clergy played direct, if discreet, roles in the consummation process. Priests might bless the marriage bed itself, sprinkling holy water on the fabrics while invoking saints associated with fertility and childbirth, such as Saint Margaret or Saint Agatha. Some participated as witnesses, ensuring that rituals concerning the first act were performed properly lest the sacrament be invalidated. More than ceremonial, the Church's gaze extended into ongoing surveillance. Midwives and nurses, often commissioned with approval from the local parish, were tasked with confirming the bride's virginity or the consummation's validity, sometimes communicating their findings back to church officials. This convergence of the sacred and supervisory highlights how deeply marriage beds were enmeshed in ecclesiastical power networks. Confession, a central pillar of medieval spirituality, also reinforced control over marital sexuality. Couples were instructed to confess sins related to chastity, desire, and sexual conduct. According to penitentials, many sexual acts were sins unless explicitly performed with the aim of procreation within marriage. This doctrine encouraged a culture where pleasure was suspect even in wedlock, held in balance by fear and religious guilt. The Church's moral strictness had tangible impacts. Couples who delayed consummation to long faced pressure from family and clergy. In some cases, bishops might pressure or threaten annulment if the bed remained unvisited, or if no heirs were forthcoming. Marriages could be dissolved not just for infidelity or impotence, but for failing to meet the physical terms of union. This control was not exempt from negotiation. Evidence reveals that nobles sometimes used church laws to their advantage, contesting marriages or dissolving unions on grounds of non-consummation or virginity loss if politically expedient. The Church's role was thus double-edged, an enforcer of morality and an arbitrator in aristocratic power struggles. The tension between public religious oversight and private marital intimacy created a complex dynamic around the marriage bed. Couples had to balance obedience to doctrine with personal affection, family expectations, and political realities. This was especially acute for noblewomen, whose sexuality was both regulated and exploited within patriarchal frameworks. Regarding pleasure, clerical attitudes fluctuated. While official teaching highlighted procreation, some clergy recognized the bond formed through conjugal intimacy. Medieval theologians debated the legitimacy of sexual pleasure within marriage, with some arguing it could strengthen the marital bond and ease procreation, while others condemned excess or passion divorced from duty. These debates found echoes in literature and art. Medieval manuscripts and poetry oftentimes wove religious imagery with erotic symbolism, reflecting society's struggle to reconcile desire with piety. The marriage bed itself appeared in myriad depictions, there as the sacred site of legitimate birth, or the risky space where sin could occur. The Church's influence also reached beyond the bedrooms into legal institutions. Marriage contracts and annulment trials often turned on proofs of consummation and virginity. Courts demanded testimonies, including from midwives and witnesses, regarding the physical realities of marriage beds. These inquiries were invasive, yet pivotal, connecting private acts to public rights and estates. Moreover, canon law's requirement for consummation shaped noble strategies around marriage and succession. Fragmented or childless unions frequently ended in annulment or remarriage to secure heirs and consolidate power. The marriage bed was a legal hinge. It created or dissolved alliances based on bodies and bedsheets rather than affection alone. The physical marriage bed was also the site of medical intervention, often sanctioned or arranged through clergy connections. Nobles summoned midwives and physicians for advice on fertility, conception difficulties, and childbirth complications. These medical practices blended faith and science, with prayers and charms accompanying treatments, underscoring the bed's dual role as a political and medical space. While the marriage bed was undeniably a political instrument, it was also paradoxically a stage for pleasure, sensuality, and even subtle forms of agency within the rigid frameworks of medieval aristocracy. Understanding this duality helps us see the bed not just as a site of duty, but as a crucible where personal desire and social power intertwined in complex and sometimes unexpected ways. Medieval noble culture recognized that sexuality was not purely procreative or transactional. Erotic literature and courtly poetry celebrated desire, affection, and the interplay of attraction, although always within prescribed bounds. This tension is vividly illustrated in the sumptuous artworks and tapestries decorating marriage chambers. Scenes of lovers entwined, mythological myths of fertility, and allegories of love told stories that both heightened the stakes of the marriage bed and softened the austerity of its political purpose. The marriage bed could be designed to kindle passion, luxurious textiles, velvet, brocade, silks along with fragrant herbs, perfumed candles, and sumptuous pillows, created an environment that invited tenderness and sensuous pleasure. This was as much about affirming status and impressing witnesses as it was about creating a space for the couple to connect beyond duty. Eroticism was paradoxically woven into the symbolism of the marriage bed's public rituals. For example, during bedding ceremonies, teasing songs, suggestive jokes, and playful banter often accompanied the serious business of consummation. This theatricality made the event a community spectacle while subtly acknowledging human desire behind the political facade. Noble spouses were often young and inexperienced, thrust into roles that demanded sexual performance before emotional readiness. Yet, within these constraints, couples sometimes forged personal bonds. Letters between aristocrats reveal candid expressions of affection, longing, and even jealousy, emotions usually suppressed by the cultural imperatives of arranged marriage. Women's sexuality, though heavily policed, was a domain where some exercised agency. Knowledge about their own bodies, passed down through midwives or elder women, gave noble women tools to manage their fertility, negotiate consummation, and sometimes delay or control intimacy. In some cases, queens and noble women used their sexual allure and skill as political capital in courts where personal favor could translate into power or protection. The marriage bed was also a site of tension and conflict. Differences in age, temperament, or desire sometimes led to strained relations complicated by duty and public scrutiny. Historical records contain examples of marriages that never consummated for years, or associations forced apart by jealousy, suspicion, or political maneuvering. Similarly, male nobility faced pressures to prove virility not only on wedding nights, but throughout married life. Failure to satisfy the bed's demands could lead to ridicule, loss of honor, or marital breakdown. Some noblemen sought sexual experience before marriage. Others succumbed to the stigma of impotence or infidelity. Mistresses and secondary partners complicated the narrative, while official marriages were political contracts. Extramarital relationships often provided emotional or physical satisfaction missing from those unions. These liaisons were tacitly accepted, sometimes openly acknowledged as part of noble life, and occasionally involved their own rituals and power dynamics. The paradox of the marriage bed thus lay in its simultaneous function as a symbol of control and a site of negotiation, pleasure, and personal connection. It embodied the contradictions of medieval noble life, regulated yet sensuous, public yet intimate, duty-bound yet deeply human. As time evolved, These tensions influenced broader cultural shifts in marriage, sexuality, and gender roles, setting the stage for the Renaissance and beyond. Nobles learned to navigate the demands of alliance building alongside the complexities of desire, crafting a legacy where the bed was a theatre of both power and passion. Despite the marriage bed's pervasive role as a political instrument and spectacle, medieval noble couples often developed subtle, private ways to navigate intimacy spaces where desire, negotiation, and even rebellion could quietly flourish beyond the watchful eyes of the family, clergy, and court. This softer, sometimes hidden aspect of conjugal life reveals the complexities beneath the official narratives of duty and control. Communication was key. Noble spouses, many married young and inexperienced, relied on coded language and secret signals to express affection or discontent. Letters passed between couples sometimes used metaphors of nature, music, or shared memories to speak of feelings that could not be openly declared. A line about the soft dawn might signal longing. A reference to stormy seas could hint at marital conflict. Understanding these codes required trust and intimacy beyond mere physical presence. Even within the constraints of arranged marriages and political alliances, some couples forged deep emotional bonds. Exchanges of embroidered handkerchiefs, locks of hair, or wine-soaked verses created private rituals that cultivated attachment and comfort, counterpoint to the public performance of bedding ceremonies. These small acts were gifts of agency and affection, serving as a quiet rebellion against the strictures imposed by birth and duty. Certain noble women became adept at wielding their sexuality as a tool of influence. In letters and household accounts, women often negotiated the terms of their conjugal relations, delaying consummation, choosing when and how to engage. Midwives and trusted female attendants sometimes acted as intermediaries, offering advice on managing marital tensions, fertility, and pleasure. This network of female knowledge was a vital resource and a protected secret among women of status. Beyond the domestic chamber, the noble marriage bed was embedded within networks of gossip and rumor. Women learned to navigate the dangers posed by jealous rivals, malicious chambermaids, and nosy relatives. The ability to conceal desires or indiscretions, or to deploy rumors strategically, was a form of social power. Reputation was fragile, yet weaponized with skill. The line between tactic and truth blurred in the charged atmosphere surrounding marital intimacy. Some husbands embraced their roles with openness and even tenderness, defying clichés of brutal or indifferent noblemen. Chronicles and letters reveal moments where mutual desire flourished alongside obligations, a shared laugh, a gentle touch, a night spent talking rather than simply fulfilling duty. These glimpses remind us that medieval marriage beds were not only sites of control, but sometimes places of relational creativity. Yet this intimacy was governed by contradictions. Church teaching and courtly expectations often conflicted, placing couples in impossible binds. Pleasure could be revered as a divine gift or condemned as dangerous temptation. Noble spouses balanced their personal desires against public reputations and spiritual anxieties. The very act of seeking joy in the marriage bed could be a form of resistance or a source of profound guilt. Not all marriages conformed to expected patterns. Some flourished. Others were fraught with tension, avoidance, or even cruelty. Historical records contain cases of spouses who rejected consummation or fled before the wedding night. Others endured abusive relationships, shrouded by silence and social pressure. The marriage bed could be a site of trauma as well as triumph. revealing the uneven power dynamics of medieval nobility. Magic and superstition often intersected with these private negotiations. Couples might employ charms, amulets, or love potions to awaken desire or protect fidelity. Herbs like rosemary and vervain were common bedside tokens thought to enhance fertility or ward off evil. These practices, part pragmatic, part mystical, offered a sense of control amid the often unpredictable realities of marital life. The role of humor and playfulness should not be overlooked. Some couples, once familiar with their roles and each other, found ways to laugh and tease behind closed doors. This levity could relieve the weight of ceremony and expectation. Satirical poetry and courtly jokes frequently hinted at the realities beneath the glossy surface of noble matrimony, exposing foibles, frustrations, and fantasies with sly wit. Interestingly, the marriage bed's material culture also reflected this duality of public and private meaning. While grand canopy beds and embroidered hangings impressed visitors and signaled alliance, the linens and pillows used nightly were intimately personal objects. Evidence suggests that noble spouses sometimes commissioned bespoke items with initials, secret inscriptions, or favored motifs known only to them and their closest circle. Travel and absence created further complexities. Noble couples often spent considerable time apart due to war, court duties, or governance. Letters from these periods reveal longing, jealousy, and negotiations over fidelity and reunion. The anticipation of return sharpened the significance of the marriage bed as both physical space and symbol of reunion and renewal. This private world of codes and rebellions, while sheltered from public scrutiny, was never fully disconnected from the political realities of noble life. Affairs, legitimate or otherwise, could upset alliances. Secret pregnancies or delayed consummations might provoke scandal or legal battles. The marriage bed was always a nexus where personal emotion and public interest collided. Ultimately, the marriage bed represents a layered space where medieval nobles enacted the tensions of their time between control and desire, public duty and private need, power and vulnerability. The dances of secrecy and openness, ritual and intimacy, shaped not only their marriages but the dynasties and histories built upon them. The medieval noble marriage bed was never immune to crisis or scandal. Beneath the rich fabrics, perfumed chambers, and carefully staged ceremonies lurked pressures that could tear alliances apart, shatter reputations, and ignite fierce disputes. As dynastic politics intertwined with personal intimacy, the bed became a battleground not merely of bodies, but of power, legitimacy, and survival. One of the most volatile sites of conflict was the question of consummation or its failure. A marriage left unconsummated could unravel the entire political enterprise that the union represented. Noble families, intent on securing their bloodlines and territories, treated consummation as non-negotiable. Annulments based on claims of non-consummation became political weapons, often wielded to dissolve inconvenient alliances or forge new ones. Such was the case in the high-profile annulment suits that periodically rocked the courts of Europe. Claims that a bride was a virgin or had been deflowered prematurely, or conversely, that the groom was impotent or negligent, could devastate noble families. Questions of consummation were rarely private or discreet. They were litigated publicly, with midwives, witnesses, and physicians called to testify. The bridal sheet's emblematic relics, stained with blood, could become contested. Evidence or forgeries. Scandals involving the marriage bed could extend far beyond missing blood or late consummation. Stories abound of spouses accused of adultery, infidelity, or even poisoning, concerns that ultimately funneled through the bedchamber. A wife's suspected betrayal within the sanctity of the marriage bed endangered her honor and the legitimacy of children, while a husband's infidelities, though often tolerated, could lead to dangerous political and personal strife. One famously explosive case involved Joan, Queen of Navarre, wife of Henry IV of England, late 14th century. Accusations of infidelity and illicit behavior swirled around Joan, fueled partly by political rivals seeking to undermine her influence. Though many allegations were never conclusively proven, the suspicion alone suffused court life with tension. The Queen's reputation, like her marriage bed, was a contested site of power where gossip, political intrigue, and personal misery intertwined. The marriage bed also figured in disputes about fertility and heirship, perhaps the most urgent. Concerns of noble households. Infertility could doom alliances as surely as war. A noble family's legacy depended not merely on a marriage contract, but on the concrete proof of issues born from that union. When children failed to appear, rumors flew and blame was cast often disproportionately onto the woman. Medical experts, midwives, and spiritual authorities were regularly consulted, their diagnoses tinged with gendered assumptions. In some cases, women were subjected to humiliating or even cruel treatments, bearing the burden of imagined or real reproductive failure. The pressure to bear sons to continue a family name and inherit titles meant that the marriage bed was constantly under scrutiny long after the wedding night. Yet the politics of the marriage bed could also pivot on more subtle contests of power. Noble women, though often infantilized or controlled, occasionally used the bed and the rituals surrounding it to assert agency, delaying consummation as a form of negotiation, fabricating or hiding evidence of virginity, or manipulating the narrative around fertility could serve as strategies to influence marriage contracts or protect personal interests. Historical records reveal that wedding night delays, sometimes orchestrated by the bride's family or attendants, could buy time for renegotiations of dowries or temper the demands of aggressive spouses. Similarly, the production or concealment of bloody sheets could be a calculated gamble in the high-stakes game of reputation and inheritance. The marriage bed's significance extended into the world of art and cultural memory, where it became a potent symbol of both union and conflict. Illuminated manuscripts depicted bedding ceremonies with a mixture of reverence and veiled sensuality, while troubadour poetry and courtly literature explored the tensions of duty, desire, and deception that unfolded beneath the curtains. Yet, for all its ceremonial weight, the marriage bed was also a site of profound personal experience, traumatic or negotiated. Medieval nobles, especially young couples, faced an array of emotions from excitement and tenderness to fear and resentment as they navigated expectations often alien and overwhelming. Letters from the period occasionally reveal moments of affection and vulnerability, suggesting that even within rigid structures, genuine intimacy and complex humanity persisted. More broadly, the symbolism and politics of the marriage bed resonated beyond individual households and generations. The bed was a nexus where religious, legal, and social norms converged, a crucible for defining power, gender roles, and lineage in medieval society. By shaping bodies and private spaces, the marriage bed shaped the very structure of medieval power. The echoes of these practices endure, informing modern understandings of marriage, gender, and sexuality. Today's fascination with medieval customs, whether with public bedding rituals, bridal sheet inspections, or the rich interplay of ritual and intimacy, testify to the marriage bed's enduring power as symbol and site of human drama. The noble marriage bed of the medieval period was far more than a piece of furniture or a private sanctuary. It was a cornerstone of social order, a tool of political power, and a complex cultural symbol whose influence echoed far beyond the chamber curtains. As we conclude this exploration, it is essential to trace how this singular space shaped intimate relations, gender roles, and even legal and cultural norms for centuries to come. The marriage bed's legacy lies in its embodiment of medieval tensions between public and private, duty and desire, control and consent. Its role as a political instrument ensured that bodies, especially women's bodies, were tightly regulated, scrutinized, and politicized. Virginity, consummation, and fertility were not merely personal matters, but public concerns, entangled with family honor, inheritance laws, and dynastic ambitions. Legal frameworks developed around the marriage bed endured into the early modern era. Canon law's insistence on consummation as essential to marriage validity influenced courts and family strategies for generations. The ritualized proof of bloodied sheets and witness testimonies became cultural touchstones, even as practices evolved. Marriage annulments based on non-consummation persisted as tools to navigate political intrigue and personal crises, reinforcing the bed's significance. As a locus of power, the symbolic decorations of the marriage bed transformed family stories into material culture. Tapestries, embroidered linens, and carvings celebrated lineage, fertility, and the sanctity of union. These artifacts became heirlooms, tangible evidence of social status and legacy. Their iconography, from biblical themes to mythic allusions, linked individual families to broader narratives of divine order and royal authority. The cultural scripts born around the marriage bed also molded gender expectations deeply. Women's bodies were cast as vessels for lineage and virtue, tightly policed by family, clergy, and society. Men were tasked with proving virility and safeguarding succession. These roles, rigid though they were not without negotiation. As we've seen, noble women and men alike found ways to assert agency, resist, and shape their intimacies amid constraints. Eroticism and pleasure, often subordinated to duty, nonetheless permeated the marriage bed's contested space. The lavish textile choices, ritual perfumes, and intimate communications suggest moments where desire and affection blossomed, even flourished. Courtly love, literature, and private letters reveal a medieval world aware of the tensions between obligation and affection, repression and expression. The marriage bed's dual identity as both instrument of control and site of personal intimacy created paradoxes that scholars continue to unravel. The public rituals served political stability, yet private negotiations, coded signals, and subtle acts of rebellion breathed life and complexity into medieval matrimonial relations. This balance of spectacle and secrecy shaped not just individual relationships, but the social fabric itself. Historically, the marriage bed also influenced legacy systems, inheritance, legitimacy laws, social hierarchies that structured medieval and later European society. The emphasis on consummation as proof shaped marriage strategies, familial alliances, and disputes. The cultural importance of the bed echoed in literary tropes, ritualistic performances, and even in legal prescriptions concerning marriage and sexuality well into modernity. Its symbolic power extended into art, literature, and popular imagination. The marriage bed was depicted in illuminated manuscripts, church murals, and drama, often imbued with layers of meaning about purity, sin, power, and love. These representations shaped how contemporaries imagined marriage while informing subsequent cultural and historical understandings. Even today, vestiges of these medieval notions survive subtly in cultural attitudes towards virginity, wedding, rituals, and the intertwining of sexuality and legitimacy. Modern perceptions about proof of consummation, ideals of marital roles, and public commemoration of unions trace genealogies back to the medieval marriage bed's paradoxical legacy. To fully appreciate this weight of history, we must recognize the marriage bed as a contested space where individual, familial, and societal anxieties overpower. Sexuality and identity played out with extraordinary intensity. It was a theater where alliances were forged, reputations made or shattered, and where human desires were harnessed, expressed, or suppressed according to complex, sometimes contradictory, codes. While medieval nobles faced immense pressures and public scrutiny, they also navigated intimacy creatively within these confines. Acts of secret communication, ritualized performance, and personal resistance reveal a nuanced world that resists simplistic characterization. The marriage bed was, in essence, a space of negotiation, a crucible of medieval nobility's political, social, and erotic lives, as historians have shown. Understanding the noble marriage bed demands moving beyond the sanitized, romanticized visions of marriage. Instead, it invites us to look at the intersecting realities of agency and constraint, public performance and private feeling, piety and passion. In doing so, we reveal the medieval marriage bed as a powerful, enduring symbol of human complexity.